Hello, I'm Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz and welcome to a special housing report brought to you in association with Bank of New Zealand, where today we look at figures for September on house sales and prices from the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand and Quotable Value, the two main places where you get house prices and house value or price information. Now what they show is relatively modest volumes of house sales in September, which is, remember, the first month of spring, and normally there's a boost in sales in spring as people put their houses on to make them look good when the sun's shining. Seasonally adjusted volumes actually fell 2.3% in September, the figures from REINZ show, although there was actually an increase of 43 overall through the country in September versus August. And it is up 21.1% from a year ago. So much healthier volumes than a year ago, but they haven't really kicked on in September from August. The median price across the country, according to the REINZ figures, was actually down 1.4% in September from August, down to 350,000. Now, there is another measure of prices that REINZ produces in line with Reserve Bank methodology called the House Price Index, which is a stratified measure, and it takes out some of the skewing effects of lots of houses being sold, say at the top end or at the bottom end. And what that shows is actually it rose 1.7% in September from August, although it's 3% below its peak. And I'll just show you that chart just to give you an idea of how it works. I'll just take you to our site. Just down below at the bottom of the video, right at the bottom of the article, you'll see here the housing price index, stratified house price measures, and you can see here that we saw the tail end of the boom from 2005 to 2006. Then we saw the recession 2008, 2009, a bounce back up. Remember when house prices hit their lows and we saw a big drop in interest rates, and then we've sort of been bumping along for a bit the last year or 2 years, but there has been a little bit of an increase through the first 6 months of 2011. Now, the QV numbers show a gradual rise in prices in the last month or so, supported by strong prices in central Auckland and in Christchurch. Now the QV index is measured slightly differently from the REINZ figures. The REINZ figures are simply what's happened to house prices, just actually looking at the prices of the houses that sold in that month and how many houses were sold. The QV index is a little bit more detailed. What it does is work out when a house sells in a particular region, how that compared to its capital value, and then creates an index and then applies that across the market. So it's not quite a direct measure, but some would say it smooths out some of the ups and downs. And it shows prices up 0.7% from a year ago, but still 4.6% below their peak for the nation. But what it does is it shows contrasting fortunes across the country, particularly between Auckland and Christchurch and the rest of the country. And I'm just going to take you back now again to the chart for QV, and you can link to it again in this link here in the story, which is see our interactive chart on the QV value indices here, and that takes you through to our chart section, which has got lots of juicy charts. I love it. And you can see here the change in the index. Let's take it out for a longer period. You can move this slider down the bottom, and that shows you what's happened to house prices way back into the mid-80s. Obviously there was the house price boom 2002 to 2007, down again, up again, and pretty much flat, although rising a little bit in the last 6 months or so. Now, what's the difference in prices between Auckland, particularly Old Auckland, and the rest of the country? Well, QV points out that Old Auckland, remember that's the old city council, we're talking here about, St Heliers, around Remuera, Epsom, those sorts of central suburb areas, their prices are actually up 5.4% since January, according to QV. And values are 2.6% above the peak. What does that mean? Record house prices in Old Auckland. What's going on here? Why is Auckland doing so much better than the rest of the country? Well, there's obviously migration. New Zealand is the place that many migrants come to first, or where expats come back to after being overseas. They come here for the big jobs. Also, there's migration within New Zealand. When you go from small town, you tend to go to big city, and particularly with the Christchurch earthquake, many people have been coming to Auckland. Also, there's the effect of the tax cuts. Now, obviously, those who are on highest incomes got the biggest chunk of money from the tax cuts, and some of those who've used that money to gear up to buy properties. And obviously, those with the highest incomes tends to be those living in Auckland, and particularly in that Old Auckland area. And then we have a supply problem too. Obviously, so many houses in Auckland affected by the Leaky building syndrome that wiped out a generation of housing. And we've seen very little new house building in Auckland and all around the country, really. And that's helping to explain why prices are particularly firm in Auckland. They're obviously firm, in Christchurch, because there are so few houses up for sale that are not damaged, and those that are up for sale and aren't damaged are going for good prices. But overall, across the country, volumes are not so strong in Auckland. Actually only up 1.5% on August. And some people say that the Rugby World Cup may be a factor there. People much more interested in rugby than they are in buying houses. Can't believe that. House buying is a very important thing, particularly to people in Auckland. Now let's look at the outlook for interest rates over the longer term. And that's also supportive for the housing market. People are now saying interest rates will stay on hold until the beginning of next year. And obviously with the dramas happening all around the world, the Reserve Bank has said itself that it doesn't see the need to move interest rates all that soon. Also, very little new supply coming into the market, and very interesting to see Fletcher Building put out a profit warning today saying that domestic construction remained relatively subdued, and they're also seeing delays in getting the rebuild going in Christchurch. So plenty of easy money too. Remember, the banks seem very keen to lend at the moment. Not much supply of new housing. That's keeping the pressure on house prices. I'm Bernard Hickey. That was a special housing report brought to you in association with Bank of New Zealand.